special guest tonight had her Cursillo or did her Cursillo in 2011, and shortly after that, and with the spiritual guidance from our very own Father Jose Arong, she joined the Dominican Sisters of San Rafael. She is now in the final stages of her initial formation and is in discernment for making her perpetual vows. She recently began her doctoral studies in comparative religion at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, through which she hopes to contribute to our church's interfaith work. Please welcome Sister Christina Atienza. So, as Sister Edith said, I did my Cursillo in 2011, October 2011. It was Cursillo number 83 at Camp St. Francis in Aptos, California, the Curia of St. Perpetual.
I took it out because I needed to connect your, but I'm having a problem too because what is showing is the opposite. So I have to try to switch the screen. I'm sorry, sister, it's not working.
So my inspiration, the title of my talk today is...
Just give me a signal, sis, if you want to switch to, if you want to move to the next one.
Is Feminine Ways of Holiness, a gift and a challenge to our church. So be prepared to be a little bit uncomfortable with some of the things that I'm going to say because it's a gift and it's a challenge to our church also. The next slide, please. Real quickly, the organization and the focus. The inspiration of this talk was St. Francis's newly minted apostolic exhortation. Show of hands, who's read it?
I'll take.
Nope. Not yet. It's short. It's only 40 pages. So unlike some of this stuff, so you can just get it off the internet. It's really short. It's good. It's called Gaudate
et Exultate.
Yeah, et Exultate. Rejoice and be glad. And it is all about the call to holiness. So that's what we're talking about today. It's feminine because they asked me to talk about women in the church. So this came out, perfect timing, call to holiness, feminine ways of holiness. So we're going to be talking about 4 different examples of feminine ways of holiness. This is not all inclusive, of course, because there are many, many different ways of being holy. But I chose these 4 different themes. So one is of the embodied feminine, right? And so these are case studies. So we will be looking at reproductive health debates for that particular case study. This is also women as workers. So we will look at the case of Dorothy Day. This is also women as mystics. Who's familiar with Julian of Norwich here? Good. I was trying to pick somebody who you didn't already know, right? So nice introduction. And then finally, our last case study is women as spiritual leaders, and then we will be talking there about a subject that is near and dear to my own heart, which is the Vatican's assessment of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. That's the organization that sort of spearheads all of the sister congregations in the US. And the key question here is, how are these real-life examples of feminine spirituality and prophecy a gift and a challenge for our church? So as we go through it, keep that question in mind. I also want to give you a caveat. There's going to be a lot of text. So when you see the slide, you'll be like, ah, you know. So don't worry, settle in, chill out. I'll read it. If you want to close your eyes, you don't have to read it with me. Just close your eyes. So the idea is to just get the gist of what this is, right? So next slide, please. Okay, so here's Pope Francis next to a bunch of women, right? And this is his new 40-pager apostolic exhortation. Very, very readable, very nice. Next slide, please. The focus here of Pope Francis is on practical holiness, something that is called, in certain instances, the middle class of holiness. So not anything that's too highbrow, you know, only the saints can achieve kind of holiness, but kind of a middle class sort of holiness. And some of the things that he says there that I was really attracted to, he says holiness is the most attractive face of the church. Isn't that true? And when you see numbers there, those correspond to the article numbers in the exhortation. So he also says, holiness is nothing other than charity lived to its fullest. Right? Easy. He says, holiness is living the Beatitudes. So he has a whole chapter on the Beatitudes, and he makes it come alive for us today. He also says, holiness is a constant battle. We know this, right? It's not easy. It's not easy to be good. So his focus, because he's doing practical holiness, is on also looking at signs of holiness in today's world. And so he mentions these in various different ways. He talks about perseverance, patience, and meekness. Joy and a sense of humor. You can't be a sour, holy person, right? Because if you're truly holy, you're happy. It's not that you're just skating through life, right? Because it is a constant battle. But there's something in you that feels right, that feels grounded, that feels like you can be joyful. You're joyful in the love of God, right? He also says it's marked by boldness and passion, right? You can't just be sort of lying off to the side, doing your own thing without caring about what's happening in the world, as Brother Noah was just saying, right? Holiness is also lived in community, right? You know this. This is where the rubber meets the road of love your neighbor, is in community. He also talks about how holiness is a state of constant prayer. And he says everybody is called to holiness, not just the saints. So here's a little meme of Oprah Winfrey saying, you, all of us called to holiness. Okay. Next slide, please. So he makes a whole bunch of references to women. Pope Francis is very kind to women, unlike some of his predecessors. He sort of elevates the status of women to a certain extent, more than his predecessors. So for this, we should be grateful. And he makes a lot of references in the exhortation to women as examples and teachers. So I'm not going to read this whole list, but I really just wanted you to see how many saints and how many blesseds he refers to in the whole 40-page exhortation. So lots and lots of women. And of course, he has a special mention of the Virgin Mary. So this is what he says at the very end of the exhortation. He says, I would like these reflections to be crowned by Mary because she lived the Beatitudes of Jesus as none other. She is the woman who rejoiced in the presence of God, who treasured everything in her heart, and who let herself be pierced by the sword. Mary is the saint among the saints, blessed above all others, and she teaches us the way of holiness, and she walks ever at our side. So, big blessing over the whole exhortation from the Virgin Mary. Okay, next slide, please. So these are a couple of the more detailed references that he makes to women. So he says, the genius of woman is seen in feminine styles of holiness, which are an essential means of reflecting God's holiness in this world. Indeed, in times when women tended to be most ignored and overlooked, the Holy Spirit raised up saints whose attractiveness produced new spiritual vigor and important reforms in the church. So for instance, Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, some of the doctors of the church, Therese of Lisieux. So very nice, very accurate. Then let me see what you think about this second one. He says, here is an example. This is on Article 16. He says, a woman goes shopping and she meets a neighbor and they begin to speak and the gossip starts. We associate women with gossip. Hey, Pope. But she says in her heart, no, I will not speak badly of anyone. This is a step forward in holiness. Later at home, one of her children wants to talk to her about his hopes and dreams, and even though she is tired, she sits down and listens with patience and love. Or sometimes no patience and love. That is another sacrifice that brings holiness. Later, she experiences some anxiety, but recalling the love of the Virgin Mary, she takes her rosary and prays with faith. Yet another path of holiness. Later still, she goes out onto the street, encounters a poor person, and stops to say a kind word to him. One more step. What do you think of that? Sound real to you? Sound doable to you?
Doable, but hard.
Very hard. Yeah, it's very hard. He's making the point, right? And of course, there are many days when we do not just automatically reach for that rosary. There are probably more days when we don't do that. So there's a certain sense in which this is sort of aspirational, right? So it's not really exactly what happens on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that we can imagine. It's something that we can aspire to, right? And it's not just women, of course. This is an invitation for everyone. Okay, next slide, please. So then we move on to our case studies. So the first case study is women as the embodied feminine. We're going to talk about the case of debates on reproductive health. Okay, next slide, please. So what I want to do is talk about reproductive health debates in the Philippines, right? And what I'll be doing here is I'll be drawing upon the work of the Redemptorist priest Alfonso Suico Jr. And he just did his thesis for his licentiate in sacred theology over at the Jesuit School of Theology, and it was entitled Appraising Religious Liberty in the Philippine Reproductive Health Debates. Just very interesting, okay? And his thesis goes something like this. He says, religious freedom, he proposes religious freedom as the framework for the debate on reproductive health, as opposed to what is happening now. And really the two sides of the debate is you have the Philippine government that wants to provide accessible health care to women and children, including contraception. It's one side of the debate. The other side of the debate is the Catholic Church, represented by the bishops of the Philippines. And they're saying that a lot of these things are contrary to the teachings on sexuality and marriage of the Church. Okay? So what Father Suico is proposing is that let's change the framing of this debate so that we can move past this impasse. Okay? Next slide, please. He says there are key questions. These are the ones that he identified. It's been 4 years since the Philippine, this was actually 2016, so now it's been 5 years, since the Philippine Reproductive Health Act of 2012 was passed, but the debates remain in gridlock. He says there are lingering questions about the Church's involvement and influence. What is the role of the Church? remember, this is the Philippines, right? So what is the role of the church in the creation of public policy? How were the arguments of the bishops against birth control framed? What is the status of women's rights and reproductive health rights in the country today? And in light of the Filipino religiosity and passion for freedom, is there a more proactive way that we can go forward in dialogue, right? Rather than just getting stuck? Okay? Next slide, please. So quickly, I just want to share with you, as I use some of these terms, he defines it himself in his thesis. When he talks about religious freedom, he talks about the right to live in the truth of one's faith. And this is a definition that he pulls out of church documents. It's the right to live in the truth of one's faith and in conformity to one's transcendent dignity as a person. No one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, within due limits, of course. Now, he defines reproductive health based on the definition of the World Health Organization. And that's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So it's not just the absence of disease. Reproductive health is sort of a state where you're thriving in all the dimensions. And it doesn't matter what age you are. It's something that's appropriate for whatever age you are. Okay? It's the ability also to have responsible, satisfying, and a safe sex life, and to reproduce, and freedom to decide if, when, and how often to reproduce. So in 2012, in the Philippines, was passed something called the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act. And it's the first time that there is a comprehensive contraception and fertility control, maternal and infant care, and sex education program in the Philippines. Okay. Next slide, please. There's a lot of religious diversity in the Philippines, even if we have a Catholic, Roman Catholic majority, and this will come into play later on. So we have folks who, I think I've read anywhere from like 60-something% to 80-something% of a Catholic, Roman Catholic population. As you know, there are also quite a few Muslims in the south, and mainly in Mindanao and in Sulu. There's also Aglibayan and Iglesia ni Cristo. These are the years when they were founded. And there's a whole bunch of other Protestant, as well as native religious traditions or religious customs as well. So I put that there because it comes into play later on. Now remember, the Philippine bishops are touting, Catholic beliefs. So what happens to all of these people who are non-Catholic, right? So that becomes key. So let me explain now in the next slide quickly what the government actions have been. So that's one side of the debate. Okay. So in 1987, the newly drafted Constitution in 1987 provided for the protection of women, their safety, and the protection of maternal functions. Okay. There was also the Midwifery Act of 1992. There was something called the Magna Carta of Women in 2009. And then a whole bunch of different bills that involve reproductive health until the 2012 Act came along. That was the comprehensive one that brought a whole bunch of these different bills together. Okay? When it was passed in 2012, it was constitutionally contested by the Philippine bishops as well as other folks, other groups. So it went through the courts before it was actually implemented, and the Supreme Court found that it was actually constitutional. So it moved forward. And then after that, the FDA started an investigation to make sure that the contraceptives that were part of this program were not ones that would induce abortions. Because there are contraceptives that would do that. So they wanted to make sure, because abortion, like divorce, are still illegal in the Philippines. So this does not change that, okay? And then, so finally in 2014 came out the rules and the regulations for implementing this. So these are the government's actions in regard to reproductive health. So next slide, please. So now these